Hello, LinkedIn, and hello, everyone, and welcome back to our latest series here, our LinkedIn Live series. And my name's Sarah Goodall. I'm from Tribal Impact, and I am so excited for this conversation today. We're going to be talking about the power of employee value proposition and its connection to employee advocacy. Now, we have a special guest today to kick off this new year with our LinkedIn Live series, Vicki Saunders. And Vicki and I spoke before Christmas. I can't remember how our paths sort of crossed, Vicki. I think I was following you. What happened?
I commented on something on LinkedIn. You commented back. We had a little bit of a chat. And then, we said, let's chat properly.
Yeah. And then that was it. And then after that conversation, Vicki, every conversation I had for about 3 weeks after, I was like, you've got to follow Vicki. You've got to follow Vicki. So just to kick things off, do you want to just give us a bit of a introduction as to who you are and your background and what you do today? Would be really good, please.
Yeah, no problem. So I'm Vicki. I'm the founder of two businesses now, the EVP Consultancy and the Employer Brand Coach. And I'm from, all kinds of roles in-house predominantly. I started out in marketing. I made most of the Here Come the Girls TV ads for Boots back in the day. I did customer proposition development work at Boots. I did corporate comms. I ended up in the employer brand team. And for the last 10 years, I did employer brand, EVP, employee experience at Boots. Then I went over to BAE Systems. I like to talk about going from sun creams to submarines. And then I ended up at Currys and left there in the summer. Yeah, and I've set up my own consultancy business now.
It's amazing. I love that. Sun creams to submarines. Love the connection there.
Do you know what the connection is, though?
No,
they sound like they're not connected, sun creams and submarines.
Yeah. Are they connected then?
Yeah, they both protect you.
Yeah.
There you go.
That's why you work in marketing and branding.
Yes, that's the way my brain works.
Oh, this is going to be such an amazing conversation because anybody who's just joined us, I spoke to Vicki just before Christmas and it was just incredible where this is going to go. If anybody's joining us live, I know people are listening to this on our podcast as a recorded version and also watching back. But if you are live with us today, this is a great chance to say hello because I see you, or some of you already have. Amit, Danuta, thank you. It's brilliant. Dave, great to see you as well. Pop your comments and questions in there. And I've got a ton of questions that I'm going to ask Vicki, but I'll try and weave yours in as well. So Vicki, let's start with a very basic question, just a leveler. How do you define employer branding and the employee value proposition? And what's your definition of those two terms?
Yeah, so I definitely call it employee value proposition, not employer value proposition. And that's because it stems from customer value proposition. So we've basically borrowed that term, brought it over from commercial and put it into HR. So it's definitely employee value proposition in my mind. And the difference is that I talk about Mars bars when I talk about this. Have I told you this analogy already?
No.
Okay. So if you think about a Mars bar without its wrapper on. So you just think about the chocolate bar. It's made up of three things predominantly. It's caramel, nougat, and milk chocolate. So it's already had some design that's gone into it. It's not your raw ingredients. That's your employee experience. But then when you put those three elements together, the chocolate, the nougat, the caramel, that makes up the Mars bar. But it doesn't have its wrapper on it. So that is the proposition. That's the employee value proposition. But then when you do put a wrapper on it, the black wrapper with the red logo, that's when you give it an identity, a personality. That's the employer brand. That's how you're expressing what it's like to be able to eat a Mars bar. And then when you go to a shop, Sainsbury's, wherever, and you see Mars bar up against Twix and up against Bounty, I know Bounty's a bit contentious, aren't they? Anyway, it's up against other chocolate bars, right? and they're trying to get you to buy lots of Mars bars or whatever in one go. That's recruitment marketing. That's when you've got vacancies to fill. That's very different to when you're just trying to create latent desire for the brand, for the product. So that's the difference. The EVP is the naked Mars bar. Put a wrapper on it. That's the employer brand. When you go into a shop and they're trying to flog lots of Mars bars in one go, that's like job boards. That's recruitment marketing.
Wow. I never thought we'd have an analogy of a chocolate bar aligned to... It is brilliant. I love that. So you've really sort of succinctly, because I was going to ask you those terms, employer brand, EVP, and that's really interesting that you focus on employee value proposition, because it's their value proposition. And recruitment marketing, they're all sort of intermingled, aren't they? And people, I saw a LinkedIn post you did recently about that, didn't you, last week, I think? Yeah, explaining those differences. So it's fabulous. Can we dive into, Dave, I'm hungry too. So Dave said, I love the analogy. Now I'm hungry. And I have just had some chocolate cake though, so I don't need a chocolate bar. But yeah, so this was the moment when I spoke to you, the neuroscience behind advocacy. And I want to spend a little bit of time talking about that, because I think our community is going to love that. Can you just explain to our community and audience what your insights are around this topic about the connection between neuroscience and advocacy?
Yeah, sure. So I'm not a neuroscience background, I'm a marketeer by trade, but I'm very curious about things. And have you ever heard of the 5 whys principle? You want to get to the root cause of a problem. You ask why 5 times until you get to it. And I did that a while back with advocacy, because I wanted to find out. Well, I knew that it was powerful. We know that it works. We can see stats that prove that it works, but I wanted to know why. And there's quite a few things happen in the brain when somebody is advocating for something and someone else is listening to them. Quite a few different processes. But the bit that I find really fascinating is these things called mirror neurons. Right? They were discovered in the 1990s. There were these scientists in the University of Parma in Italy, and they were doing some research into monkeys and looking at which parts of the brain responded when monkeys were holding various objects. And so they had these monkeys wired up with all these sensors on the brain. And when they looked at when the monkeys were holding things, they could see which parts of the brain fired up and everything else. But what they discovered, this isn't what they set out to discover, which is often the case with science, isn't it? What they actually discovered was that when a monkey was watching another monkey grasping the same item, the same bits of the brain fired. And it wasn't even just monkeys. If they watched a human hold the same item, the same bits in the brain fired. So this is how they discovered mirror neurons. And they now believe that mirror neurons are really important for us in how we experience empathy. Now, empathy is absolutely critical to advocacy. And it goes back to how we're wired as humans. If you think of us, as primitive humans, when we lived in groups and were quite tribal, empathy was actually really important. We think of it now as probably seeing it as more of a advanced thing that we've developed over time. But actually, recent studies have said that actually empathy was probably developed as part of our survival as a human species, because it helped us see when other people needed things. It helped us cooperate with each other, and it helped us care for each other. So it meant that tribes had communal care of their children, which was much more efficient. It meant that they could protect themselves from other people, from various dangers, animal attacks, etc., etc. So that empathy is critical to human evolution. And so that's how those two things, so the mirror neurons and the empathy, are the absolute foundations, as far as I can see, that I'm really fascinated about with advocacy. Because what happens when somebody's advocating is, if somebody's talking about something that they're really passionate about, it triggers an emotional response. That empathy triggers without you even realizing it. It's hardwired into how our brains work as humans, as part of the evolution of the species, that when we see someone talk about something passionately, it triggers that emotional feeling ourselves. We empathize, and then we trust and we believe in what that person is saying. So actually the critical part of it is that, therefore, if you try and advocate for something that you don't believe in, it won't actually work. Do you know what I mean? That it has to come from the heart. It has to come from what is really important to you as a person, and that's how it will then come across and trigger that emotional response in the person you're advocating to.
Yeah, you've said a few things there, which I think really gets well, apart from the 5 whys, which reminds me of my children, Vicki, because they sorry, when you said the 5 whys, I thought, are you talking about my kids here? Because that's all they are. Why? But why? But actually, I love how you've just dug right to the core of what advocacy is built upon. And you've mentioned things like emotion, empathy, and trust. You've mentioned 3 things there, which is where advocacy, and I do wonder if this is where it comes a bit of false advocacy comes across, you know, where you see people sort of sharing stuff because maybe they've got to share it, or, you know, where's the passion behind the words? Does that really sound like them? Is somebody writing that, you know? And I think this is where advocacy really has to work. It isn't a program. It isn't a tool. It isn't an action. It's much deeper than that. It's connecting your employees to something deeper, which is what you've just explained. So given that then, and I'm going to ask you to explain this example about, you know, where you used to work in a minute, but you talked about, you know, neuroscience principles, but if you're developing communication strategies, you know, either internally or externally, how does what you've just talked about impact the development of communication strategies?
So clearly, if you understand that science, authenticity is absolutely at the core of that, isn't it? And also, if you are thinking about communications, and particularly thinking about how your employees play a role in communicating, you know, to support your employer brand, it truly, you know, it really does have to come from the heart of the employees. So if you've built out a well-crafted EVP, and you've co-created that with your employees in the first place, and it's built on what's really important to them, both functional and emotional needs, then you're halfway there, because your EVP is well grounded, and therefore what you're wanting your employees to be able to support you with, it will come from the heart, because that's what you've built it on in the first place. But if you've got kind of corporate kind of stories that you're trying to ask people to toe the line on, and can you just share this? Can you just share the other? It won't die a death. Do you know what I mean? But it won't be anywhere near as impactful as if it's something that's come from the heart of the employees. So way back when I was at Boots, actually, my predecessor at Boots, I can't take the credit, Alex Burstow, started all of the work on, she was really ahead of the game on social media, etc., etc. And she does some great work. And when I came into the role, our kind of advocacy work was kind of muddling along at a certain pace. And I thought, what is it? We got a great spike every year around children in need, right? So November, brilliant. Social goes crazy because Boots's call centre is the biggest call centre to support children in need. So all of the people from support office go and volunteer to stay up till 3 o'clock in the morning to take all of the telephone calls that come into the call centre, etc. Anyway, so great spike because everyone's really passionate about it. But the rest of the year, it was pretty much like, you know, the same. And it wasn't until I started doing some work, going back to the employee survey, and I looked at the pride question. I looked at the responses to the question that said, how proud are you to work for Boots? You know, or I am proud to work for Boots. Strongly agree down to strongly disagree, right? And all of the stuff that was in the open comments, the verbatim underneath, was absolute gold dust. That was the stuff that people were really passionate about. And the stuff that came up were things like, and number 7 advisors were talking about the makeovers that they do for women who've just been through chemotherapy treatment. So in partnership with Macmillan, they'll talk to women about their skincare, you know, try and help them put their eyebrows back on because they've probably fallen out because of their hair loss, etc., etc. Those were the things that were coming out as being reasons why I'm proud to work for Boots. Makes the hair stand up on the back of my neck even now just talking about it. So actually, it was then that we thought, actually, let's use their story. Do you know what I mean? Let's find out what our employees are passionate about and help them tell their stories. Do you know what I mean? The ideal place is that you find a correlation between what your big thought leadership, you know, pillars of your EVP, what those stories are, and what your employees want to say, and you find the middle ground between them. But basically, yeah, it's about authenticity and it coming from the heart.
And when you did that with Boots, you applied that, you looked at those insights, you looked at the stories, and then you mentioned that you started to adjust the advocacy program to include more content created by employees for employees to share. And you said that the program sort of took a flying start at that point, didn't it? It accelerated.
Yeah. And I think it's just I suppose part of it was just a mindset shift from, you know, most organizations went through a phase, didn't they, in the early 20s when social media kicked off, where everything was kind of in lockdown. You know, it's like, make it really clear that you're only speaking from your own point of view. You're not speaking on behalf of the business. You know, you have to put this little clause in the top of your profile, and you know, there was all these rules, etc., etc. And so it took a long time to come back from some of that kind of stuff that I suppose were put in place both to protect the organization, but also to protect the employees. You know, it took a long time to change the mentality in the organization and the appetite to want to, you know, be a little freer around it. Do you know what I mean? And so that took a long time to kind of get across. Yeah.
And it's a trust thing as well. I think a lot of corporations it's a safe zone, especially in regulated industries, you know, where we want to make sure that employees don't tread on dodgy ground here and don't overstep a line. And, you know, they must share the pre-approved content. But anybody who's got any questions, please feel free to pop them in, because I have a list and I could talk to Vicki for hours, to be honest with you. So, but I want to make sure your curiosities are answered too. So I'm going to come back to the connection then to employee advocacy, because we do a lot of work around employee advocacy, but this connection with the employer brand. Have you seen that connection in real time? What sort of things have you seen as that being proof that the two work well together?
I actually think that advocacy is a closer representation of the EVP rather than the employer brand. It supports the employer brand because they're both built on the same thing, right? Here's your EVP. Advocacy is one way of expressing it. Employer brand is another way of expressing it. But I actually think it's a greater reflection of what the actual experience is of working in the organization. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, it is part of the employer brand. It amplifies it, and it kind of sits alongside the employer brand messages, because the employer brand messages are talking from the voice of the brand, whereas the advocacy is talking from the voices of employees. So they're doing slightly different jobs, but in the same direction, really.
Yeah, I think that's quite interesting, because actually the employee voice actually adds weight and almost supports it with evidence, if you like. So you can't really do one without the other, because you can have a great brand story, but where's the employees endorsing that story and really talking about it? And I suppose this is where platforms like Glassdoor come into play, isn't it? That, you know, this is where the true reviews come through.
And it's like how we all, you know, however many years ago did TripAdvisor launch, you know, it was that we wanted to understand what other customers thought about a company's product or service. And that's the same, really. That's what Glassdoor does. And I'm a true believer that, you know, the more that we understand our colleagues and our employees, that the stronger the relationship with them will be, in a similar way that I feel like customer value proposition has laid the foundations. It's laid the path, right? Because a customer value proposition is right at the heart of a commercial strategy. It attracts customers to you, and if it's a strong proposition, it makes them repeat purchase, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And what I'm starting to see, and I'm hoping to see more and more, is that organizations start to see EVP as being the center of the people strategy. It doesn't make them repeat purchase. You don't want them to come, you know, and get some great boomerang hires. Do you know what I mean? But the equivalent in HR is retention. You want people to stay with the organization, be fulfilled, grow their careers, be more, you know, learn more skills, fulfill their potential. That's the equivalent in HR, really.
Yeah. And also employee referrals as well. You know, when you're on a hiring scope in your growth of your business, you know, how you get employees to attract other employees as well. And this is a great measure of success, employee referrals, attrition rates. You know, we were talking to Stephen Brand before Christmas, before the Christmas break, and he was talking a lot about these kind of metrics, you know, time to hire, cost per hire. You may not get more applicants, but you might get better applicants applying for the role. They're a bit more of a better fit. Fascinating conversation. So Andrea, thank you for your question. I'm going to read it out. I've got one here. So you've seen that employees take more pride and are happier when working for companies that support non-profit initiatives. Is that important part of an employer brand? So have you seen that employees take more pride and are happier when working for companies that support non-profit initiatives? Oh, I suppose that's in reference to that Macmillan.
Yeah. So yes, but it comes with a really big caveat. In my view, and where I've seen it work really successfully, it did work at Boots. And the reason it worked at Boots is because care is absolutely fundamental to the Boots brand. You know, the Boots has been around, you know, since 1849, and Jessie Boot was the person who brought affordable healthcare to the masses way before the NHS was even ever existed. And so that care and healthcare is at the core of the Boots brand. So actually, you know, that's that Macmillan partnership, Children in Need, they're about care, so that they fit. If you are a brand and you try to, I think, stretch into something that is beyond your core, then I think it raises eyebrows, doesn't it? People go, why are they doing that? You know, are they doing it for the headlines and the PR around it, or are they doing it because it's part of the DNA of the organization? You know, and that's so I think it is powerful, and the reason it's also powerful, you know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yeah.
So the hierarchy goes up like this, isn't it? So at the bottom is all of your foundational stuff to do with, if we were to apply EVP to it, it's like pay, right? And then it goes up into health and safety needs. Then it goes up into stuff to do with belonging. Then it goes up to stuff to do with your potential, your development, your learning. And then it goes up into things to do with purpose, like sustainability, etc., etc. And so the more stuff that goes towards the top of the pyramid, today it makes it more and more powerful from an EVP point of view. When our parents were in the world of work, like in the 1960s, 1970s, you know, health and safety law hadn't even come out, you know. There weren't the same laws even about holidays or about redundancy pay, those kind of things, let alone the stuff that if you talk to Gen Zs in a screening call or in an interview process, they'll absolutely ask about what the sustainability credentials of the organization. You know, they'll want to know what you're doing from a diversity and inclusion point of view. What is the impact that you're having in the communities that you operate in, you know, the social impact, because that appetite and that, you know, the want of employees today is much more up into that purpose part of Maslow's hierarchy than it is how much do I get paid and which location do I work in. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I was just going to suggest that actually, because the generations joining the workforce now, that is much more. It's important to them, and you've just absolutely nailed it there. They're asking questions like that, and actually even before they're applying for roles, how you publicly communicate this through your exec team, the stance that you have. I mean, the Edelman Trust Barometer came out last week. I'm sure you've looked at that, and you know, and the reliance on, you know, business leaders, employees look to them as a trustworthy source and their peers. So it comes back to trust, empathy, emotion, or authenticity. You can't fake this. This is not something to fake. I did want to talk a little bit about workplace culture. Look at that. We're already at past. How's that, man? How have we managed that already? I've got loads of questions here. I've got how a well-crafted EVP influences employee engagement, but also company culture. What's the connection between that? And thank you, Louise, for your question. I'll ask that again in a second. But how does a well-crafted EVP influence culture and workplace culture?
Yeah. So if we go back to our Mars bar analogy, and you think about the Mars bar as being the EVP, and it's been made up of those three pillars: your caramel, your chocolate, and your nougat. Yeah. The process that you've put it through, how the chocolate has been made, and all of the different processes that make up the bar, I see those as being the culture, because they're the behaviors, they're the way of doing things around here. They're the relationships between the different aspects of the Mars bar that make it come together. So the Mars bar is the proposition, but all the processes that you've put it through to get it there are what make up the culture.
Oh, that's brilliant. It's the behaviors, it's the processes, it's the untouchable part, which is the bit that gets you to the EVP. And I bet Dave's sat there hungry now. He's still hungry, probably. You brought Mars bars back up, Vicki.
Yeah, it's a common phrase, isn't it, on engagement surveys, the way things are done around here, which is the layman's term of saying what's the culture like, you know, and that's how I see it.
No, fabulous. And how that sort of impacts positive culture as well. So actually, I'm going to ask that one for Louise, because even though I've got my own questions, I'm going to ask yours, Louise. So do you think you can start an advocacy program using pre-approved content approach as a bit of a proof of concept, just to help build confidence, and then move more towards an employee-led and employee-created content? Is it possible to evolve from one to the other?
Yeah,
great question.
Absolutely. And the reason is that it's about confidence. Yeah. You know, so each time I've set up advocacy programs, I've started with stuff that I know people are passionate about. So, you know, at Boots, that was Macmillan and Children in Need and things like that. But the reason I start with those things, it's partly because people are passionate about them. So they're more, you know, they're emotionally engaged, they're invested, but also actually being honest, they're less likely to get trolled. Yeah. That stuff. So you need to start with something that people can find their feet a little bit, build up some confidence without the weight of the world coming in and you know, negative reactions coming out as well. So, because if someone comes out and starts trolling someone for talking about helping cancer patients after chemo, they're going to get self-moderated out of the platform. Do you know what I mean? So it's absolutely is possible to start with stuff that is more predetermined and defined. I would absolutely try and make sure that the language, the visuals, any video content is as authentic as possible. Don't try and make it too polished, because then it looks like the brand. It doesn't look like the person, you know. But yes, it is possible. But I would keep that goal in mind of moving to a place where it is increasingly, you know, enabling the voices and the stories of the people.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you, Vicki. And I think, you know, all employees are at a different place of maturity. So we often talk about this, you know, really understanding where they're starting from, because there's going to be some that are completely terrified of posting anything, maybe because of previous experiences. And then there'll be some that are way more confident and even writing their own content, maybe even doing some of their own videos and everything in between. For me, it's really important you map where they are today and then move them to their next logical step, because you can't. Years ago, I remember somebody saying, "Oh, we want these influencers, you know, creating videos." I'm like, they've never engaged with anyone. They've never left a comment. They're not active already. You're asking them to jump too high, too early. So really having that maturity journey mapped out, knowing where people are starting and then moving them towards it. And not everybody will move, will they? Not everybody will move. And that's okay.
I actually think that the more it grows organically, the better. And the way that I've seen that work really well is when you start out with a whatever you call them, advocates, ambassadors, champions, whatever, start with a really small, tight-knit group. Let them build their confidence. And then instead of expanding the group and everything still being led by the employer brand team or the comms team or whatever, I've seen it work really well where your first cohort of champions, whatever, then buddy up with 2 people each. So you end up with a little triplet. And then those people buddy up with 2 more each. So you end up with all of these little triplets growing. Each person is just kind of coaching and mentoring 2 people rather than everything coming from head office, from the centre. Do you know what I mean? Head office and the centre can help with technical knowledge about the platform, can help with, you know, producing some nice photography for them to use or video or whatever else. But I actually think the more that the coaching and the relationship stays within the community rather than it being everyone and head office.
I think that's a brilliant. And this actually, you mentioned something there. You've mentioned confidence, but you also mentioned community. And this is where it starts to fuel itself, you know, and they start to help each other, educate each other. And then it becomes less orchestrated, but it just got a bit of a push to start with. What a great idea. The cohorts with the buddy systems. Love that. I've just got LinkedIn news. I don't know who you are. You haven't got your name on my screen, but I am loving the Mars bar analogy. I might borrow that talk for topics with my colleagues.
Yeah,
it's great. I'm seeing a visual here. Have you done a visual for that?
Oh,
Vicky? Yeah, I need to have a look at that. Is that on your post? I think it might have been. But Dave, you should have gotten LinkedIn sponsored by Mars. Yeah, Mars. If anybody from Mars is here, we'd love to do our next LinkedIn Live with you.
Well, Chris is actually the head of employer brand for Mars. And I remember the first time I shared this analogy on LinkedIn, and he put a comment saying, "You know what? I'm gutted. I can't believe I didn't come up with this." You know.
Yeah, should have got that.
Mars do know about it. You
know. So talking a bit, because this actually touches a little bit, I think, on what Louise said about employee advocacy being a little less control and letting it go a little bit. How can organizations navigate that with employees so they start to own their own narrative and have that confidence? Because you've talked about it's important that employees build the confidence, but how do you know? Is it through the coaching and mentoring triplet cohorts that you're talking about?
Predominantly, I do try to keep it kind of quite tight to just a few people, you know, coordinating with each other at any point in time. You know, I think it's more from the point of view of support than control. I try to think about it more from the point of view of how can I enable, how can I support, what do I need to do to help them, you know, shine and you know, tell their stories rather than how do I control what they're saying. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but even for regulated industries, Vicki, that's my curiosity, because they're typically very, very cautious, very risk averse. So, do you think that applies there as well?
Then I think it's much safer place to play in is the stuff to do with social impact. It's to do with charities, communities. early careers, talk about career foundational programs, talk about development programs, leadership. So more of those kind of things that I suppose are still fundamental and still people are passionate about, but steer away from some of those choppy waters.
Topics where you could get tripped up, or
Yes.
I've got some stats actually here from according to LinkedIn, a great employer brand leads to, and they call it employer brand. So 28% lower employee turnover, 50% lower cost per hire. That's extraordinary, right? 50% more qualified applicants. That was talking about the better quality applicants within. You might not get more applicants, but you don't want more. You want better qualified. We say this for social selling, and even marketing. You can pay. Do you want millions of eyeballs, or do you want the right eyeballs? It's about doing the right things. And 1 to 2 times faster time to hire. That's incredible.
It's phenomenal. Yeah,
it is, isn't it? Think of the cost savings. I mean, we're in a bit of a cost-sensitive world at the minute, and when you're looking at things like that, how you can really achieve like cost savings, and looking at the return that you can create, the growth impact that you can have, incredible. So I've got a couple more questions. So anybody, before I wrap it up, because I could talk for ages, but I do have 2 very good questions I just want to ask you. Future, Vicki, what's your view when you're looking at the future of an employee value proposition, maybe even employer branding? Where do you see it evolving?
I think both EVP and employer brand as an expression of the EVP will need to get much tighter at answering the question, why this organization and not another organization? I think there's quite a lot of organizations now have some form of an employer brand. Increasingly, there's organizations developing their EVP, which I think is great because you've got the foundation for it rather than just the wrapper. But I still see lots of organizations launching an employer brand that sounds like the next brand along. It could be any organization in that industry. And that's not really doing the job that it was supposed to do. Unless it gives people a reason for wanting to work for that organization, then to me it's not as powerful as it could be, So I think it's going to be about differentiation. I also think that I see quite a lot of EVP work being done, which looks at the typical methodology of an EVP, looks at your current workforce, your potential workforce by talking to candidates. It talks to your leaders, etc., and does a diagnostic piece looking at what's important to them, what they want, why they join the organization, why they stay, all of those things, all right and good things to do. But there isn't enough at the moment, I think, at looking at and where will that go in the future. So I see quite a lot of work going on where you end up with an EVP and therefore an employer brand because it's built on it, that's relevant for 2024, but isn't built for what's going to come in 2025. And it shouldn't need to change that often. An EVP should only really need to change, and the employer brand with it. And if there's fundamental change in the organization, quite a big level of change, you've gone into a new, completely new growth area, which is, totally changed the direction of the organization, or something external has happened, like a global pandemic and the shift to, hybrid working or whatever. It really has to be quite fundamental change that should change it. Do you know what I mean? If you think about how often a brand changes its customer value proposition, it's only really iterative tweaks, unless they decide to, develop a whole new revenue stream that they want to attract customers to. So to me, it's about building with today in mind, but also an eye on the future.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I can see what you're saying there. You could build all of this for 2024, but actually you need to have that foresight for the future and how it might look, the future talent that you want to bring in as well. So talking of futures, where it's not really futures anymore, it's here and now. My final question for you is about AI. And I'm going to ask lots of people this, I think, on these sessions, because it's impacting everything. How do you believe AI can be integrated into what you do and what you see organizations doing around employee value propositions?
Yeah. So I think I was quite, I wasn't front foot. I didn't join up to ChatGPT at the end of November last year. I think I got an account in May. So I wasn't one of the first, but I certainly wasn't one of the last. And so I've been using it for quite a while. And I think there's real benefit to be using it in EVP and employer branding from a point of view of drafting things. If you're the kind of person who struggles with the blank page, the daunting blank page, that can help. But if I do struggle with it from the point of view of advocacy and authenticity, for all of the reasons that we've talked about here, if it doesn't sound like it's the words of that person, I worry about deep fake videos. I just feel like we're gonna face into some really tricky times. There's also some real big watch outs with AI, particularly with image generated AI. I'm sure there's people on here who use Canva. Canva's image generation tool is built on Stable Diffusion. There was a big study done by Bloomberg last year looking at Stable Diffusion and used it to generate pictures of people in different professions. I think they chose 20 professions, 10 high paid, 10 low paid, and it then analysed the images to see the colour of the people generated and the gender of the people generated by the image generation tool that was built from Stable Diffusion. And there was an incredible amount of bias in there. So typically you would see much darker skin tones in lower paid professions being generated, which is not reality. And even things like, it generated 100 pictures of judges, like legal judges. And it only had, I think it had 3 women come out, but something like 30% of all judges are female. So there's something to there's a really big watch out, particularly on the image generation part of it.
Yeah, I think from a perspective of advocacy as well, employees, it's a quick way to have content, but it's not a quick way to have thought leadership. I was talking to somebody this week about it as well, and they were all generally in agreement that it's a great, I'm going to quote Felipe in our team here, it's not my thing, but he said it's a great editing tool, but it isn't replacing your own thoughts, opinions, your insights, but use it to help formulate them, but don't use it to create them and generate them. Absolutely. And I think, that watch out around bias is absolutely key. We've just got to be really careful. But yeah, so I'm going to wrap it up because we've been going so long, and I knew this was going to be a great conversation, Vicki. And thank you for everyone. Oh, Dave said Gen AI needs its own LinkedIn Live with a group of experts. So much to unpack here. Do you know what, Dave? I think we should just do that, to be honest, because we are bringing it to every conversation. But we could just have a bit of a jamming session, couldn't we? And just have a chat, and that's good. Oh, here we go. Another one. This is so interesting. I attended a conference last year where they showcased image generation, and these exact questions came to mind. How will we ensure that the use of Gen AI does not contribute to the increase of gaps, barriers, inequality? Absolutely. Yeah, it's it's a great productivity tool, but it comes with its warning signals as well. So I've got to summarize, Vicki. I never thought we'd have a Mars bar analogy on here, so that was definitely a standout for me. I love that. I just loved when you said about the processes that sit behind that, the culture. That is the behaviors. That's what really it is about. So I love that. You talked about emotion, empathy, trust, authenticity, this connection between advocacy and why people do it. There is such truth in that. And I think this is where organizations need to move beyond seeing employees as a bit of a channel for amplifying content and actually look inwards a bit more and see employees as the founders of the brand and living the brand and amplifying that experience rather than anything else. So I just want to say huge thank you. I love that. So thank you. And thank you for everyone for watching. You can watch this back on record if there's things that Vicki said that you didn't quite catch, so you can watch it back on record. But thank you so much. Ryan said we've got another one next week. In next week's time, we've got how to elevate your content strategy through employee advocacy. So that would be a good one too. But thank you, Vicki. Follow Vicki, connect with Vicki, and we'll see you next week. Take care, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.